there's this thing that Naval Ravikant talks about, which is the idea of product market founder fit. So we all know product market fit. Let me just educate the audience for a bit. So if you don't know what that is, product market fit just means when you're building a business and you find a product that matches a market and it fits. So let's say you're selling Coca-Cola to like college kids and like people start buying a bunch of Coca-Colas, it works. There's a product market fit. What Naval talks about is founder product market fit. So the product, the market, but also the right founder for that type of business. So the right founder for a coaching business is somebody who likes coaching people in general anyways.
Brenden Kumarasamy is the founder of MasterTalk and coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become top 1% communicators in their industries. He also has a popular YouTube channel, which I recommend, called MasterTalk, with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone in the world. In our conversation, we discussed how sometimes you discover your life passions accidentally, how a simple 3-step exercise can boost your communication abilities, and how to know if coaching is something you're meant to do. Enjoy the conversation. Brenden, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Daniel, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. So you're a communications coach. You're doing a lot of really great work and helping train the next generation of leaders, communicators, and entrepreneurs. But just to backtrack it a bit, if I told 10-year-old Brenden that one day he's going to be one of the world's top communications coaches, what would you have said?
I would have said that person was an idiot because I didn't know when I was 10 years old that communication coaching was even a profession. Right? So my parents immigrated from Sri Lanka. So it's a little country south of India and to Canada. So when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, Daniel, it's funny, you know how like in those I know what the word is in French, the yearbook, right? Like when you have a yearbook and you say in the yearbook what you want to do and you grow up. So, everyone else is like, I want to be a movie actor. I want to be like an astronaut. I want to be like a singer when you're like 12 years old and you think the world is your oyster. And it still is for some of us. But for me, the answer was accountant. I wanted to be an accountant ever since I was 12. And I never changed my mind until I was 20 because I was really good at math and I was really terrible at everything else. So, yeah, I would have called myself a dumbass.
Do you think thinking back then, do you think you just picked accounting because you figured it's something you would have been good at, but not something you really enjoyed?
Yeah, this is something I don't like about personal development, Daniel. People talk so much about doing something that you love, and I think that's fine. I love what I do, by the way. Master Talk, communication, it's amazing. But I think if you're like broke and you don't have a lot of money and you're an immigrant family, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this can relate to what I'm saying, it's hard to dream up about something that you love and you get paid to do it. That sounds like a pipe dream at the beginning. So when I was 12, I just focused on what I was going to be good at, really. And I also feel that served me really well in life to find my passion later. And the insight of being an accountant, I didn't know a single accountant in my life, was I was really good at math in my report card, and every other grade sucked. And all of my other friends who were smarter than me wanted to be doctors and engineers. Oh, nobody wants to be an accountant. It's my perfect ace in the hole. And that's what I ended up doing.
So you spoke a little bit about passions there, and oftentimes it's interesting. A lot of people discover their passion on the road less traveled. There's actually a guy on YouTube. Have you ever heard of Hub's Life? Or I forget
No,
what it
but
is.
tell me more. I want to hear.
So this guy Hub's Life. I think his first name is Connor, but I'm not positive about on that. But his handle is basically Hub's Life. But in short, he actually has a really interesting story. So he right now works in corporate America, but initially growing up, he really loved videotaping and loved recording videos. And he started out in corporate America, but then he took a job as a designer, or kind of, sorry, not a designer, but a more creative type, kind of creative video editor, director, some kind of role. But what's interesting is he said when he started it, when it became more his job and not something he was passionate about, what ended up happening was he was really busy. He was working for a startup. He was traveling multiple weekends, couldn't spend as much time at home. So he just wasn't as happy. And then he got another offer to go back to corporate America, which he took. But then he also started kind of as a creative outlet, videotaping his daily life and just kind of his daily routines, like very, very basic videography, very basic editing. And I think he just passed around 700,000 followers on Instagram. I think he has a little over 400K on TikTok. So really this huge following. And one of the things that he always posts about is a lot of the times your passion is on the road less traveled, which I thought was really interesting, which kind of leads me to the other thing I wanted to ask about. I know in your story, you say you accidentally developed a skill in helping others communicate. So how did that accident happen?
Yeah, for sure, Daniel. And great example with Hub's life. He's exactly, we could talk about this later if you want. He's exactly how I think most people should go about finding their passion. Where in my case, going back to the accounting gig, so I went to college for accounting. I have a degree in accounting, Daniel. But when I was 19, somebody told me I needed to work for the big four accounting firms, which for those who don't know are Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst& Young, and KPMG. They're like these big firms that everybody wants to work at.
You're giving a lot of people PTSD right now.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of it's a lot. But to make this a little bit more lighthearted, it's funny. Somebody invited me to a PricewaterhouseCoopers like information session, but I was so ignorant because I knew I wanted to be an accountant, but I didn't know what it does. Like my parents were factory workers. I had nobody in the business world to kind of coach me. So I thought PricewaterhouseCoopers was a water bottling company initially because that had the word water in it, right? So I thought they were just gonna sell bottled water. I was like, why would I want to work there?
I did too, shamelessly, when I was in college.
Oh,
I
did you?
thought it was like a chemical or water company, but I relate to that.
That's so funny. You're the only one besides me that I know of that could relate to that. Everyone
Makes
else is
us
just like,
both pal.
yeah, there you go. So what happened was I started attending these networking cocktail like student associations like in college for accounting, like the accounting society. We all know we have societies for like sports or recreational things, but there's ones for degrees too. So I attend these events where all of the guys there were like 2-3 years older than me. I was in my first semester of college, Daniel, and I asked them, and they had jobs at the big four, so they were like Jesus Christ to me. They were like God. So I went up to these gods and I was like, how do I get a job at the big four? My dad's a factory woman. Like, how do I didn't tell them that part, but I asked them. And they said something that was really bizarre. Because I thought they were going to say study well, good grades. And those things are somewhat important, Daniel.
Mhm.
But really what they said is do case competition. And I looked at him and I was like, what's a case competition? Like most of us who are listening to this. And he went on to explain that a case competition is like professional sports for nerds. So other guys my age were playing basketball, like I see the jersey in the back, right? Basketball,
Yep.
rugby, soccer, right? Different sports. I did presentations competitively. But here's the key point. I'll throw it back to you. It wasn't because I had a passion for presentations, right? I developed that passion later in my career. I did these competitions so that I could win and get a job in accounting so that I could alleviate my family out of poverty. And then once I got the job, then I started dreaming about the passion. Then it became my life's calling accidentally.
Wow, it's so interesting. So essentially, your main goal was to kind of get this big four job, and on that path, you were like, okay, you were told that you had to do these case competitions, and through those case competitions, you kind of found something that really stuck. Does that sound right?
That's correct. Entrepreneurship was never the path for me.
Hmm.
I never thought it was going to be. For most people, it isn't. By the way, statistically, I'm just in the minority where, and Hub's life is in the minority where I ended
Hmm.
up working out the first time or second time around. But yeah, that's what happened.
So I know you kind of did these case competitions, and through a lot of practice makes perfect, at the risk of sounding cliche, but I think that a lot of us who accomplish something kind of know that cliche is a cliche for a reason. But as you got really great at this skill and became a great communicator, when was the moment you knew you wanted to be a communication coach and really wanted to pursue this as an entrepreneurial venture?
Absolutely, Daniel. There's two parts to that question. So the first one is where did I develop the passion for communication coaching, and the second one is as a business. So let's start with the first part. So what happened was I was a year into case competition land. I started winning a couple of them, losing a lot of them too, but I hate losing. So I started working really hard. And once again, not because I had a passion for this, I just wanted to win the competitions. I hate losing.
Hmm.
And then when I started winning, I was very fortunate. I got a great internship at PricewaterhouseCoopers really early in my degree. So I was one of the lucky kids who like won the lottery ticket and got a job at the Big Four before I graduated. So I was well positioned. And the second piece is the second I got the job, I knew I was set. So I started thinking about like what I really like. And what I realized, and it came mostly out of frustration, is I became an executive running the student association. So there's like a student association for case competitions,
Hmm.
and I became one of the people managing it because I felt there's a couple of things that I weren't managed well. And we picked the students who enter the sports team basically for presentation. And I was telling the other people on the committee, I was like, guys, 20% of the people recruiting for this are incredibly intelligent, but they're horrible communicators. I was one of the best speakers at the time, and I was just like, let me just coach them. But I didn't know how to coach them, Daniel. So I wasn't charging them money or something. It wasn't a vocation. It wasn't a profession. I just took those 20 students and I was just coaching them on what I thought was the right answer. And then we were making a lot of mistakes together. And by the time, and then we flash forward a little bit further, in 2019, I started my degree in 2015. So 4 years later, one of my friends looked at me and asked me a question nobody asked me my entire degree, and that's what opened MasterTalk, which was, how did you learn how to be a communication coach? Like, how did you learn how to speak? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, didn't you have a mentor? Didn't you Toastmaster? I was like, no, I just watched a bunch of videos, and I'd realized I'd coached 50 people, and I was actually pretty damn good at communication coaching without realizing.
So to backtrack a bit there, you say when you were recruiting people for this organization, you noticed that they were really terrible communicators. What specifically did you notice in kind of their speech or their attitude or their communication that made you realize, okay, these people really should work on that skill?
Man, I wish more people would ask me that question, Dan. You know, most people don't like to go into my story that much. They
You
kind of
picked
just
the
go
right
straight to the.
podcast today, Brendan.
There you go. I love it, man. So I can go through the nerd stuff. So let me give two parts to this. One that's going to be valuable to the audience. The other part that's really just case competition related, so the audience won't resonate with that. So let me start with the easy stuff that everyone can relate to. So they were shaking a lot when they were speaking. They were looking around the place. They weren't sounding really confident. In a case competition, just for context, you're solving a business problem. So an example would be, let's say me and you're on the same team, and the executives at Walmart come up to us and they say, hey, Brenden, hey, Daniel, we want to open a new store, but we only have enough money for one new store. Should we open it in Arkansas or should we open it in New York City? And then there's like pros and cons. Obviously, the one in Arkansas is going to be a lot cheaper. So it's like, was the competition? So you have to read this 20-page document. You have to see the data, and you have to make a case as to where the executives should be spending their money. So of course, a lot of this is fictional. They're not actually taking money and like deploying it. But really, the point of these case competitions is it's a recruitment tool for companies. So they'll come, they'll watch these 20-year-old kids present and go, wow, these kids are so good. And they'll start giving them job offers. That's how I got the job at PwC, and then I later got a job in IBM's consulting group. So that's the context. So the mistakes is they're shaky a lot, they're looking around the place, they look nervous as they're presenting their solution, whereas the case comp part is you're presenting in front of executives, so you need to sound like an executive. So I get them to open their eyes more, I get them to smile more, I get them to be a lot more confident in the delivery, as if somebody paid $1 million for that advice. So a lot of the students I was coaching back then, and that ended up being the case even with executives and companies later in my career, Daniel, is like people don't have enough conviction in the ideas they're sharing. And if you're not convicted, like if I came on this podcast and I started going, Daniel, I'm not really sure, what I'm doing. If I start sounding like that, it doesn't matter if my content is correct. People will still look at you and go, I don't want to listen to what Brenden is saying.
So I'll get into a little more of this later, but just to touch on it. So you mentioned a lot of physical characteristics that a lot of people would be displaying. When you were coaching them, what kind of exercises did you advise them to really improve on, whether it's their hand motion or their eyes or their speech or their voice? Like what things can people specifically do in that situation?
Right. So to be frank, when I was 19, because I started coaching at 19, this is my ninth year. I'm going to my ninth year as a coach now. So back then, the answer is actually really stupid. It's like I didn't know. So I just tried a bunch of stuff, and because they were committed, they wanted to win competitions. They were ready to work with me hours every day because they were like, "Frick, Brendan's taking the time to do this," and I would literally stay up until like 1 a.m. in school, like and I would literally move from classroom to classroom. This is the accounting team presenting. This is the management team presenting. I would go and I would watch. I was like, "Don't do this," and that's how I do it. Rest today, obviously. I'm a lot smarter. I'm a lot more structured. So what I would recommend people do is what I teach called RQV. So what are the three things, the three tips that people could do immediately? And the reason I ended up going with RQV, Daniel, since you wanted to hear the story,
Yep.
is the problem is when I went to teach communication skills to the general public, a lot of my languaging didn't work anymore because they didn't know what a case competition was. They didn't understand the context that I was coming from, and they couldn't relate to me. That's why I rarely talk about that part of my life on podcasts, because it's like people don't get it. And the advice I was sharing before I had to change. So let's go back to the general public. So what's RQV? R is the random word exercise. So you take a word, like phone, like camera, like clock, like basement, and you create a random 60-second presentation at the random. So you don't prepare for this. You take a word like headphone, you create a presentation. And this helps you think quickly on your feet. There's a quote people can write down, which is, if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. So if you can talk about cups, when you go back to your subject matter expertise, it's easy. Let me just pause in case you have a thought, and then I'll keep going with the other two.
No, my thoughts candidly. So, what I'm actually doing is I'm writing this stuff down. Sometimes I write down questions, but personally, I also have a lot of room to grow. And I know I'm not a perfect individual, so some of what you're saying, I'm just fully writing down to take notes on. So, note to the audience, I'm also personally growing a lot, and Brenden is a really great speaker, and I'm fortunate enough to have him on that podcast and learn a lot from him. So, sometimes I'm writing down a question, sometimes I'm taking notes for self development. So, those are my thoughts.
All good, Daniel. And the reason I pause like this, because I used to never do that, is I have this thing in podcasts, like where I get into it, I monologue for 10, 15 minutes. So the host is just listening to me, and then he's just like, okay, well, I want to say something too. That's why I pause intentionally.
It's all good.
So let's go to Q. What's Q? Q is the question drill, Daniel. So the question drill is a story I'll tell you, which is when I started guesting on podcasts, this is probably 400 or 500 shows ago. Man, I was a really young kid. I had no idea what I was talking about. Like, I remember some guy asked me, Brenden, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at him and I was like, I don't know, dude. Like, New York City, Tokyo, like, you tell me. And I was really embarrassed after that session. I was like, I am not making this mistake again. So what did I do? Every single day, Daniel, I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise. So one day was, hey, Brenden, what tips do you have for introverts? Day 2 is, what's your vision for MasterTalk? Day 3 is, what can executives do tomorrow in the boardroom to get better results in front of their clients? Then the next question was, how do you overcome imposter syndrome? But if you do that every day for a year, Daniel, you'll have answered 365 questions and you'll be bulletproof. And that's cute.
Interesting. So what's V?
V is the video message. So the video message is really simple. A lot of the people I work with, or just people in general, they just want to get more comfortable on camera, right? And a lot of coaches overcomplicate this. They're like, oh, you got to sit here. And I have the tips too. Look at the camera, smile, make sure everything is correct, make sure your setting looks good, make sure your lighting looks good. That's not the direction I like to start with, because these are the 3 easiest things to work. Me, it's all about pick somebody you love in your network and send them a 20-second video message. Say one thing you care about them about, like one thing you're grateful for them, and just say how much you appreciate them. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the only rule to that exercise, Daniel, is you are not allowed under any circumstances whatsoever to retake the video. Whatever you make is what you send. And you do that every day with a new person. You could do this with your kids if you have children. You use with nieces and nephews, your significant other. People really appreciate it. And what I love about this exercise is it makes the world a better place and it makes you a better communicator. I'll give you the punchline, which is what I do, which is not necessarily this. So it's a term I've coined called the BVM, which is the birthday video message. So what I do is in my Google Calendar, it tells me literally, like I have my Google Calendar right here as we're talking, and it tells me whose birthday it is that week. And I will put a stupid $15 birthday hat on from Amazon and I'll send them a birthday video message and people love it. And that's the 3.
So, you know what I love about that approach, and I have a question on this later, but what's beautiful about it is it starts with simplicity, the really basic things you can do. And a lot of times when you see a lot of these great subject matter experts, like yourself, you started somewhere very simple. As opposed to conventional wisdom, it's telling you to complicate everything. You have to have this, you have to have that. So I have to commend you for kind of sticking with simplicity.
And thank you for that. That means a lot to me. It's probably the best compliment somebody can give me, because that's the reason why I started MasterTalk, Daniel. Right? I'm a very process improvement kind of guy. Like, I am not the type of person who like creates things out of like magic and then like I'm an artist like Leonardo or Picasso or whatever. Like, I'm more the guy who looks at what exists in the world and goes, like that's missing. So the reason I was so confident going into Master, because I was 22 and I started making videos, and my first paid client was when I was 23. right? And he was like an Amazon, like pretty high level guy. And he was starting, and now he makes like millions of dollars, like a real estate guy. Not at the time when I met him, but the point is exactly what you said. I studied all the other experts, and they're friends of mine now. They're good guys, and there's nothing wrong with those people. They just take a very different approach to communication than what I was used to. Because remember, I have a degree in accounting. I didn't learn from somebody else how to speak. I just watched videos and I figured it out. So I was watching a lot of academics who have like PhDs in communication that I won't name, obviously. You can figure them out, it's pretty easy. Like you look them up and you're like, I don't like, how do you apply this? Like if you're a single mom with 7 kids, that's the frame I take. If you're a single mother with 7 kids and you're super busy and you want to get better at speaking, how is this going to help her? And then I realized like this is useless. And then the reason all the dots connected is I was coaching the 50 kids in college, and I was like, there's a disconnect between what I'm coaching them and what's getting them results and what's being taught to the public for free. And I wanted to make a difference there, and thankfully it worked out for all of us.
That's beautiful. So, speaking about your entrepreneurial journey, and I'm happy that you just mentioned the initial days of MasterTalk. You actually started MasterTalk in your mother's basement, a really humble beginning, like a lot of the great companies in the world. When you started, what expectations did you have for the company, if any?
Yeah, and I'm still in my mother's basement, by the way. I
All
love
good.
living in my mom, and there's nothing wrong with that. I pay for everything now. It's just a more it's an Indian thing. Like
Mhm.
Indian guys and Sri Lankans, they just live with their mom until they get married, and that's how we enrich ourselves.
We
So I
love the
live.
culture. It's all about the
Yeah,
culture.
it's all about the culture. I just say that as a joke because it gets people's attention. But yes, yes. So I had zero expectations, Daniel, going into Master Talk. Let's set the frame. So my first video was in January of 2019. And at this point of the story, I was exhilarated, not happy. I was exhilarated to start my career as an IBM consultant. So what happened after PricewaterhouseCoopers is I found out about a new career that I didn't know existed when I was 12, which was the career of management and technology consulting, where you basically get paid whether you work at McKinsey, Bain and Company, BCG, or some of the tech firms like IBM or Accenture, where you get paid money to do case competitions. What in the world is that? Like basically I loved case competitions, the best, and somebody told me that's a real job in the real world that pays way more than accounting. I was like, are you joking? I did like 50 case competitions. I was a case competition nut. That's how I got so good so quickly. So the first year I did it because I wanted a job, but then after that I just loved it and I just ate that stuff up. So then when I got a job in IBM's consulting division, I was very fortunate. I got a great job offer there. They paid me a lot of money. That's how I could retire my mom off the salary I was making. I was not thinking about doing this Master Talk thing full time. Like, it was a fun hobby. They were flying me out to Toronto, buying me lobster and stuff. I was like, IBM is my life. And I had a great 2 years and a half there. So Master Talk was just a hobby. So what happened? What changed? 9 months into Master Talk, I went to Summit of Greatness, which is an event that a podcaster that's very famous in his space now called Lewis Howes. That's what his name is.
Mhm.
And he lives in Columbus. His event is in Columbus, Ohio. It's in LA now, but he grew up there. And I listened to Lewis when I was in college. So every time I would commute back and forth, I was listening to his podcast. And I always had a dream of coming to his conference. I always wanted to meet the guy because he's like my hero. And I go there, Daniel, and that event completely changes my life. I go there, I end up meeting my first paid client there. I meet my business partner Vamsi there, who said, dude, what are you doing in your mom's basement? You should be charging thousands of dollars for coaching. And I realized when I left that event that I needed to take Master Talk seriously, because a lot of people were coming up to me and saying, man, I really wish what you were doing existed because I really need to get better at speaking. And that's when I found my passion. And I just started putting real money into Master Talk and turning it into what it is today.
Well, it's beautiful, and I'm really happy it turned into what it is. But just to backtrack a bit, when you went to that event and you were fortunate enough to meet a lot of people, you said you ended up meeting your first client at that event. How did you end up turning, a random person that you met at this great event into a client and a friend?
It was a total accident, Daniel. I wish I could tell you how smart I was and how cool I was. People ask me this all the time, which is a different question than what you're asking, but I think it's equally relevant to what we're talking about right now. Which is people text me on Instagram or on LinkedIn, they go like, how do I build a coaching business? Right? because obviously now I do this full time. I then obviously we're going to get to that point in the story where I quit IBM and I almost went bankrupt. Now today, MasterTalk is a cool business and I've done well for myself and it's amazing. But the advice I give people is two things. One is if you're not willing to coach people for free, you're not meant to be a coach. That's number one, because you just don't genuinely care about me. Like, you can tell, even if I'm a little aggressive with my delivery, like, you can tell, like, I really like being on this podcast. I'm not going like, okay, what time is it? Like, let me go to my next meeting, right? I didn't tell you there's a time limit. I just came on and was like, yeah, let's have fun. You can tell I'm having fun, right? And that there's no questions off the bar because I just love it. But the second piece is it's also intuitive. Like, there's this thing that Naval Ravikant talks about, which is the idea of product market founder fit. So we all know product market fit. Let me just educate the audience for a bit. So if you don't know what that is, product market fit just means when you're building a business and you find a product that matches a market and it fits. So let's say you're selling Coca-Cola to like college kids and like people start buying a bunch of Coca-Colas, it works. There's a product market fit. What Naval talks about is founder product market fit. So the product, the market, but also the right founder for that type of business. So the right founder for a coaching business is somebody who likes coaching people in general anyways. So when I was at that event, my conversations are just around, like, if you met me on the street, we're not talking about the weather, dude. Like, we're going to spend a few minutes and then I'm just going to ask you about your dreams. Like, what do you care about? What are you doing? So I was just doing that with everybody at the event. And Ludimir was just one of those people. And he was telling me about his dreams. And I was like, bro, I wanted to tackle it that way. I would do this, this, this. And he's like, man, that's so valuable. And then after the event, he calls me, Dan. He calls me. He's like, I want to talk to you. And I was like, yeah, let's talk. And then he's like, I really want you to be my coach. And I was really confused. I was like, why do you want me to coach you? And he's like, man, your advice was so valuable. Like, I implemented everything you said and it was so good. Like, could you coach me? And I thought he meant for free. So I was like, sure, man, let's just start on Monday. Because I just coach people. It's what I do. And he's like, no, I want to pay you for it. And I literally asked him on that call, Daniel, why do you want to pay me for it? It's just coaching, right? And he's like, no, like, you spent 7 years listening to all this Lewis stuff. I don't want to waste 7 years of my life. I'll pay you $100 an hour. Just simplify all that stuff for me so I can save time. And I never thought of it that way. And I charged him $700, and that's how I got my first client.
So there's two really important points I want to make on that. And I think that was a really great story you shared. I think that a lot of times what people don't know, or there's this misconception about coaching, realistically, a lot of the knowledge that you want, and you probably know this as a management consultant, a lot of the knowledge that you want to get out there is free and in the public domain. However, the advantage that you bring as a coach is the fact that you spend 7 years studying that and you're saving someone 7 years of time. And ideally, someone values their time at more than $100 an hour. Therefore, kind of, you're very worth it. So that's the point I really wanted to emphasize for sure.
You're totally spot on. There's a quote by Rory Vaden that summarizes that thought really well, which is money speeds up time, right? So if you put the right money in the right place for the specific thing you're looking to learn, you're speeding up time, right? Time starts to speed up. Like when you delegate something to a resource who's a $5 an hour, who's amazing, they want to do that admin work for you. And they speed up your time because you don't have to spend time doing that anymore. So I totally agree.
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to ask, kind of, well, a point and a bit of a question too. So you say that a lot of people reach out to you asking about how to become coaches, but I think there's also this big misconception that a lot of people see coaches and they think, oh, these people just speak for a living. They're not doing something tangible. They're not doing whatever, which is, negated based off the past that I just said, which this stuff takes years to understand and years to accumulate. But do you think that a lot of people focus more on coaching because they see it as, or kind of from the outside, they focus on coaching because they see it as a quote unquote easy way to make money as opposed to actually trying to add value to the world and help people on their journey?
100%, Daniel. But I also believe that's true with most businesses on the average, right? So you're going to have, like, how do I explain this in a way that makes sense? Like, you're always going to have an average, like, which is going to be a majority in any opportunity vehicle. So an opportunity vehicle just means what is the type of business you're pursuing, whether that's coaching, whether that's drop shipping, whether that's FBA, whether that's doing retail, whether it's starting a restaurant. So there's always going to be people, crypto, that are going to be in that space because they think there's a lot of money to be made and it's a quick buck. And coaching is a very profitable business. Definitely, no doubt about that. Okay, it's a very profitable business if you know how to do it correctly. So then you have the majority. And then you have the people who kind of struggle, which is going to be a small percentage of people who kind of struggle through it and realize, like any other opportunity, nothing is sexy. The grass is never greener on the other side, people. Like, coaching is amazing. It has so many perks, but I'm the right founder for that business because I have the energy to get out. Like, I have calls from like 10 to 5 podcasts, then I have sales call, then I have a 3-hour meetup. Like I just have the energy for it. I love it, right? But I'm a terrible, terrible CEO if I was the CEO of a restaurant. Like, I just wouldn't understand it. I would lose every day of the week to the guy whose dad used to cook Italian food for him, and then he would go try Italian food at the restaurants, and he would be like, this Italian food is not exactly what my dad made, and he would get really pissed off, and then he would like create his own recipes and like share. I'll lose to that guy. He'll kill me in the marketplace because he's the right founder for that business. So what tends to happen, and I don't even think that's coaching, I think that's all the businesses in every opportunity. Like NBA players. Yeah, a lot of people want to be NBA players to make a buck. How many people actually get drafted into the league? Like, the people who are actually killers, right? The people who are actually like, I'm going to die trying to get there. And even a lot of them still don't make it. So that's really the idea. So to close this point, the reason why I became successful in coaching is when the dip happens and you're struggling and you don't have clients, you get out of that dip because you really care about people. And at the end of the day, that's also what gets you clients. You deliver a bunch. And now these days, I just do podcasts for fun, right? Like, most of my clients just bring other clients, and that's what you want in this business.
So I want to ask you about the dip in a second, but I want to just linger on a thought that I've had recently when it comes to podcasting. Because, from my end, and I'm sure you know this from the entrepreneurial journey, things take a while to grow. There's a lot of constant improvement. You have to water the grass every day. But to those people, specifically that section that you mentioned were struggling, a lot of times people have trouble figuring out what their purpose is or the kind of passion they want to pursue. A big thought that I've had in my head recently, and it's so simple, but when you find something that's worth delaying your personal gratification for, I think that's something you have to commit to. So that's just something I wanted to share, a tidbit that I've had in my mind. It's something that I think people would really value and something I hope people could implement. But speaking about your journey, I know you alluded to a bit earlier, but essentially you're working at IBM. You discovered, that you could possibly pursue this coaching thing as a career. As you were on that journey or making the transition, did you ever have any doubts, or were there ever any moments where you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work out. I might have to jump back to corporate?
Oh, a ton of times, Daniel. So what happened post summit? So what happened is that this is sometimes in business you get really lucky, right? So I got lucky. I had a few of those lucky breaks in my career, and one of them was Vamsi. So what happened with Vamsi is that he's very different. He's still my 50-50 partner, and we've had an amazing relationship for 5 years. He's great. I got lucky there. Like how somebody gets lucky with their wife or their husband. It's just like, I don't know, like I just met her at some party and she's like amazing. Like, sometimes you get lucky in life. In other areas you don't. So you kind of play the cards that you're dealt. So what Vamsi looked at me is like, he's invested. He's much older than me. So he's in his 40s. He's been married for 20 years. He has 2 kids. He lives in the US. I live in Canada. He lives in Pittsburgh. So it's like, he has a completely different life than I do, Dan. But he saw a lot of potential in me. So he was like, man, this kid's really good. I like his energy. I like his YouTube efforts. I've always been looking for a brown-skinned communication coach. It just so happened he's always been looking for it because he coached a lot of Indian people on like personal growth and mindset and whatever. And he already had like a 6-figure practice. Now it's a lot bigger, but at the time it was like maybe early 6 figures. And he's like, can you like give a session to my guys? Like, just do something with them. And I was a kid, so I didn't care about how much it cost or whatever. I just did it.
Let's
And
do it.
everyone, yeah, exactly. And everyone was like, wow. So I found my first customer niche, which were Indian IT professionals. Think of the guy who works in Amazon, the guy who works in Facebook, whatever. So what happened is, after the years went on, I was still working at IBM. I never wanted to quit my job. But then my last 6 months at IBM was a slog. Like, technology consulting is really tough. Management consulting is different. I think my life would have been very different if I was at McKinsey versus IBM. But because I was at IBM, I was like debugging the software and stuff. It's just stuff I wasn't good at. So I was getting my ass kicked at IBM. I was still in line for the promotion. I probably would have made it out, became an executive at some point. But like, at some point, I was just like, I don't want to do this. And the reason I ended up jumping ship is because that year I had made $30,000 in my coaching business. We closed 10 clients at the time when I was charging $3,000. I'm more expensive now, but when I was charging $3,000, and I was like, well, I'm making $73K at IBM. Like if I close another 10 clients, like I can make up my full amount, and then I jump ship and I went full time in June of 2021.
So I was going to say McKinsey could still maybe outsource you as a consultant on public speaking. So never say never, and no to them if they ever come on. But to ask a quick follow up question regarding that, do you think finding your initial niche of clients, kind of really specifically, you said Indians that work within IT, was really critical for you to be able to really scale out your business?
I'll give you a different school of thought, Daniel. So a lot of business owners who make more money than me, I will say admittingly, always tell you to niche down. I've found in practice that doesn't always apply with some types of businesses. Like especially in service-based businesses, I don't think that applies right away. What I think to get your first 10 clients. So for me, what worked really well is you just splat a bunch of crap on a wall. So like what I did, like just to be like, I'll literally tell you exactly what I did, tactic to tactic. I'm not hiding anything. I had 3,000 followers on LinkedIn because I had a big network from college, and I literally DM'd all 3,000 people. I invited them to a free training, and then we upsold them on the program to see who bought and why. So what I did is I kind of just threw everything at the wall, and then after somebody bought something, I would interview them for like hours and go like, "Why did you buy this?" After they did,
What went through your head? Were you on drugs when you were talking to me? I mean, well, what reason would you have to purchase my coaching program?
yeah, literally. Like, I'll give you some weird thing that happened. That's actually what really grew my business. It wasn't the IT Indians because they're really hard to sell to. They're really cheap. By the way, my clients know I say this about them because it's true. They're cheap. They're even if they're rich. Like, by the way, you can look this up. Indians have the highest median income out of any ethnicity in the United States. It's not even close. Right? Because they all make their money in tech and they're all immigrants with H-1B, so they want to win. And then all their kids live with them too. So all that rent money, because a lot of the other ethnicities, you get kicked out when you're 18 or something. That's how it works in Asian. It's like we all stay together. So the Chinese guys, the Indian guys, they all do really well financially because they all keep their money and then they just buy the house outright later in their life. So why did I tell you that? Yeah, I told you that because they're still cheap, but they're hard to sell to. But the winning demographic, that's where I actually spend most of my time doing business development for, is women executives. So women executives at the VP, SVP, and C level, I've had tremendous success with that. But it'd be easy for me on a podcast to go, Daniel, let me walk you through my strategy on how. That's not what happened in reality. What happened is women just started joining my programs left and right, and I didn't know what was happening. And I started getting a little scared because I never coached that type of client before. So I was like, shit, what's going on? So I started coaching them. They loved the program. And I would just ask them candidly, why'd you buy this? Why is this important to you? And they all told me. And I was like, this makes perfect sense. And I'm happy to share what that was. But basically, I just don't want to make this too long of a ramble. But then I used that and I sold other women on the same things they were telling me. And then we blew up the business like that.
That's incredible to hear about how you kind of went from niche to like another niche to like learning why they chose you. And the one thing I just wanted to add overall, what me and Brendan are talking about are just cultural things. We're just talking about objective things we see in cultures. We're not saying anything negative or mean, just stuff we observe. We all like to laugh at each other, just keeping the good vibes. So
Correct.
I know sometimes there's people out there that'll be like a slip of the tongue and people will chastise you for something. But I just wanted to emphasize we're here out of curiosity and having good vibes. So just wanted to emphasize that. But back to the point, I thought that was a really good point that you made, and really interesting to see how you were able to build off that demographic. And I think also really humbling that you asked them why they did something or kind of how to improve, and then you were able to grow off that. To move to a bit of a higher level, as you were on this journey and as you were slowly growing, and you're a successful entrepreneur now, I'm sure you've asked advice from other entrepreneurs and other mentors. What's the biggest myth you've heard about entrepreneurship?
The biggest myth that I've heard about entrepreneurship, there's a couple. Let's see which one lands the most with the audience. The first one is that I feel externally, it's a myth that a lot of people talk about, that people make it look so easy, right? It's like, oh, you just post on social media, you do this, and that's it. Whereas the truth is to be a successful entrepreneur, especially for the first million, you need to be quite competent in many different areas of the business. So let's say like you're an executive who's making 200-300K like at a startup or at like a big corporation like General Electric or something. You're basically getting paid to do one task at a world-class level. So if you're a marketing guy or a marketing gal, you're really getting paid to like manage the marketing team and all that stuff. And it's such a high value skill that you get paid money. Or like you code. Like you're a coder and you're really good at this language and you're so good at managing teams. So you're getting paid for a specific function in the business. Whereas in entrepreneurship, you actually need to be at least a 6 out of 10, at least in everything. So you need to be 9 out of 10 in some areas, or else you won't be able to deliver an exceptional product. Let's use me as an example. So marketing and sales, I'm a 6. Right? I'm a 6. 6 enough, like I make enough money to do sales, like I'm good at it. Maybe I'm a 7, but like my scale's a little different because if you're like an 8 or a 9 or a 10, that means you're making like $10 million or $5 million doing that. So my 6 is like I make money, like I don't have to go back to corporate, but I ain't like a Zig Ziglar or like somebody who's really really strong at sales. Then you go to marketing. Marketing, I'm like 6 2, maybe like a 7 because my social media accounts are doing really well. Like I got 6 figures there, whatever. Fair enough, but I still don't consider myself that great of a marketer. But delivery, I'm an 11. Like if somebody swipes their credit card and they become a client of mine, they're gonna leave a raving fan. With 1 or 2 exceptions in my career, because I really care. Like I will add bonus calls to them. I rented out a villa for my advancement clients. I'm not even charging them for it. Like I do whatever it takes to get the client to the finish line. And it's that point alone that has made me a successful entrepreneur. They love me so much they refer a bunch of clients to me. And that's how I won. And then ascension is the final piece. How do you upsell clients? I'm maybe like 7 there too. But the point is if you come from an executive and you're good at one function, you have to have the humility to learn the other ones and be decent at it, or you will lose in business. 100%.
For sure. And as an entrepreneur, I wanted to add the fact that if you're coming in and you're a 3 out of 10, you better figure out how to get to at least a 6 or 7 out of 10 in those things that you suck at,
Yeah,
or else this whole entrepreneurship thing isn't going to work out. So I
correct.
thought that was something really, really valid. And on the other note that you mentioned when jumping into entrepreneurship, was in the sense that you really have to do everything that you can to get the client to the finish line and disregard what it takes, because I think at the end of the day you're there to serve your client and help them move forward as a public speaker. And the other thought that I wanted to add to that is you said that there's a misconception that they make it look easy. Well, if you're making it look easy from the external factor, I think it's a good thing because other people interpret it as effortless. But realistically, as an entrepreneur and someone trying to build something, and I've definitely experienced this and I'm sure you have, every day is a mess. Like you're trying to prioritize, you have stuff come up, you have to make a priority list based off how urgent something is, how fast it'll take you to do. So I think the best way to clarify that. And I thought a really, really valid point, especially with me personally going through this journey. So moving back a little bit to the public speaking and some of the work that you're doing on a bit of a higher level, why do you think public speaking, as simple as it sounds, quote unquote, why do you think it's so difficult to master?
Absolutely, Daniel. So I think the reason it's difficult to master is not because it's hard. That's one of the things I've brought to the industry. It's because we've been conditioned to not be great speakers, and I'll explain why that is. And the second reason is because it hasn't been sequenced in a way that's easy for people that I'm trying to do for the industry. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you want to lose weight, which you shouldn't, by the way. You're in good shape.
I appreciate it. I do my best.
Yeah, you don't have to lose anyway. But let's say you did. Okay, you had like a weight loss. There are so many great books out there, so many great resources that go ABC. And we all know it as a general public. Like if you interviewed some random person on the street and you just asked them, hey, if you wanted to recommend to lose weight, like what advice would you give them? Hey, no more soft drinks, cut the alcohol out, don't do anything wrong, eat less junk food, probably eat less in general, work out more, eat healthier. Very simple like ideas. Go to a gym, join like a yoga class, whatever, to lose like 5 or 10 pounds. But if we ask that same question for communication, I mean, nobody would know the answer on the street. People would go like, I don't know, talk more, speak more. So it wouldn't be very specific. So that's problem one. And hopefully with RQV, like it's like, okay, now I know what to do from this podcast. Do the random word exercise, do this with my kids, do this with my family, ask a question every day, send a video message. If you do RQV, you're already going to see results. That's one piece. The other piece is why we've been conditioned to be fearful of it. I'll go fast on this one, which is the idea of where do we learn how to speak in a formal way, Dan? Well, the answer is school, right? Whether you live in the US, whether you live in Canada, whether you live in India, whether you live in the UK, it doesn't really matter. It's all high school, middle school. That's where we learn how to present in a formal way. But here's the issue. All of those presentations, 100% of them, not 80 or 90, 100% of them have 3 fundamental problems. What are those fundamental problems? Number 1, they're all mandatory. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Hey, Daniel, you want to get breakfast and present all day?" Nobody says that, right? Number 2 is all of the presentations are never about something you care about. So it's never, "Hey, Daniel, like, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about personal growth, entrepreneurship, basketball? Why don't you do a presentation on that?" That's not how this works. You have to do a presentation on the Renaissance, on Shakespearean poetry. So nobody cares.
I'm getting PTSD from my senior year in high school just hearing this. I had to do some Shakespearean thing. It was not pleasant, but sure, you
There
were
you go.
saying.
Yeah, then you like have to memorize poems and stuff. It's like makes no sense.
PTSD.
Literally. And then the third piece, which is the worst one of all, if you think the first two are bad, imagine the third one. Every presentation, Daniel. And when I make it obvious, you kind of realize, man, this is crazy. Is every presentation is tied to a punishment. So if you don't do a great job, not only do you not get the pat on the back, you get a slap in the face and you get a threat. "Hey, Dan, if you don't present in class and you don't do a great job, we're going to reduce 20% of your grade. It's going to reduce your chances of getting into the college you want." And it creates this whole thing. So we grow up believing that communication is a chore. So it becomes one.
I think that's a really fair point. I think that a lot of the times, and what happens in school is you're conditioned to try to get everything right, not conditioned to fail and do your best, which I think is a big demographic change we have to make going back. But I thought that was for sure a beautiful point. So, you've gotten a chance to work with a lot of great clients, and I don't want to ask anything too specific, but from the clients that you've worked with or any experiences that you've seen, what's the most inspiring client story that you've experienced?
For sure, Daniel. I mean, you can ask me anything. I would say for me, I've coached 140 people privately so far in my career on a paid basis. People in general probably 200 plus, but on a paid basis probably 140. I would say out of all of them, it's hard to pick between your children, honestly. But I would say the best one, the one I'm the most proud of, is probably Ali from Aim Color. She's like the CEO of a tech company, and she has a PhD in organic chemistry, and she was really nervous about communication. She has basically her company. What she does is like she puts little glasses on your nails, so instead of having to change your nail polish every week, if you're like a woman, or like 2-3 times a week, you instead put this little clip-on nail, and you can change the color of the nail using an app. So it's really cool technology, but she wasn't selling that technology well. She would get up on the stage and go, "Yeah, this is my tech." And she's probably the most inspiring person I've seen because it's not just about the money she's raised, the customers she's got from working with me, but it's more about saying, like, taking somebody who's really, really intelligent, who has a great idea, who has a great mission, and being able to open her up in a way where she's now able to share on stages of like 500 people and 1,000 people and really crush is really powerful because that's what moves the world forward.
For sure. And it's a beautiful point that you made on there, and probably something that probably feels good on your end as a coach. So I commend you for looking at it that way. On a bit of a different note, you actually had a post on LinkedIn today that I thought was really interesting, and I felt like I had to ask you about. You mentioned a post about the 3 kinds of people you've encountered in life, and this is probably running through your head of what I'm about to say, but those who run meters, miles, and marathons. I want to take a bit of a different stance from what you said in regards to what I want to ask you. When it comes to communication, how can people move from level to level? So from the meter level to the mile level to the marathon level.
Fantastic, Daniel. Absolutely. So let's recap the lesson for the team and then let's bring this to communication. So meters, miles, and marathons, I came up with it's just some random thoughts I have sometimes in my mind. I thought this one made a lot of sense where there's kind of 3 different types of people, right? So people run meters, miles, and marathons. So let's take this podcast. So the people who are running meters listening to this right now are kind of people who are listening to this passively. They're not really paying much attention to it. They might be driving in their car, they might be cooking, and there's nothing wrong with that because doing meters is better than what everyone else is doing, which is sitting in their couch and doing nothing. So like it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Miles, however, is somebody who's like, I'm not saying they're like God or anything, but they're running a couple of miles. So they're taking some notes, they're taking some action items, they're kind of reflecting a little bit on like what can I get? And they might revisit those notes once or twice, but then they won't look at it anymore. And I'm a mile in a lot of my life. And then you have marathons. My God, people who run marathons. These are crazy people. These are people who are taking notes on every little word you're saying on a podcast. They're reflecting deeply. They'll book 30 minutes after they're done listening to this podcast and go, how can I apply this? They'll book 15 minutes in their calendar to do RQV, right? Random word exercise question drill video message. They'll say, I need to do this. I need to go to Toastmasters Club. I need to go do this. Maybe I'll hire Brenden as a coach. Maybe if I can't afford him, I'll find my sister and I'll start doing that with them. That's a marathons person. So how does that now get applied to communication? The meters person is obvious. The person who listens to this podcast and then does nothing after, right? The miles person is somebody who tries at least one of the 3 exercises we've outlined so far. So random word exercise, question drill, video message. And you're still running a few miles if you at least try each of those exercises once. So you sit down, you write questions. Maybe it's a job interview you have coming up. Maybe it's a sales call that you're leading. Maybe it's a meeting at work where you're like, they asked me a question, I got stuck, and you're reflecting on a couple of them. But you'll do it a few times. And a marathon runner is somebody who does triple 100. So triple 100 just means you text me on Instagram. The only marathon runners I've seen in my life are the people I've coached, right? Like the pro people, like the legends, the Olympians, who are like, but I would love for somebody to text me that, even if you just listen to this podcast, is they've done 100 random word exercises, not 1, not 2, they've done 100 video messages and 100 question drills, and that's marathons to me.
So would you say, in short, the way to go from level to level is just consistency and effort, and over time you won't even realize they went from like miles to marathon. You'll just see all this work that you did and then realize how much better you became at that.
Correct, Daniel. There's 15 other levels, by the way. Like, because we still haven't talked about storytelling, body language. That's why my knowledge is like the idea of communications, like juggling 18 balls at the same time, right? One of them storytelling is body language. But here's the good news. This is why I say on my LinkedIn, my goal is to make you a top 1% communicator in your industry, not in the world, in your industry. So if you're like an accountant listening to this, let me break the good news to you, and which is also bad news. The good news is if you're an accountant, nobody's sending birthday video messages to their clients. So the chances that you, the accountant listening to this podcast, will send video messages is very slim to none. But here's the good news. The good news is, if you are that person, you're the only one in America. You're the only one in Canada. I am the only communication coach in the world that I am aware of, Daniel, that sends 150 birthday video messages a year. And I think I'll be the only one. And that's really the key.
It's a way to stand out for sure. I wanted to ask you some quick, just personal questions here that I think you'll find really interesting. So you alluded to a bit earlier how your Instagram and YouTube have done really well recently. You have well over 1,000 videos. How do you keep coming up with content ideas to put out around communication?
For sure, Daniel. It's been a challenge, right? At the beginning, I never would have thought I could come up with so many ideas. So the trick is I cheat a little bit, right? Where in the sense of it's not just about coming up with new ideas, especially with the volume I put out. It's about teaching the same exact information in a brand new format. So let's say we take the random word exercise. Well, there's 6 different ways you can teach that, Daniel. There's one way, which is, okay, Daniel asked me a question on a podcast and I answer it. That's one format. The second format is I'm live in a workshop. I got a microphone and I go, hey, you, give me a random word, and I'm practicing it. That's the second one. The third format could be I'm sitting on a table and I'm just speaking to camera. This is the random word exercise. Here's how you do it. And then the fourth format is like you're standing in front of a whiteboard. It's just there. For some reason, whiteboard videos just do better. So the whiteboard is there and I'm just writing down the random word exercise and I'm explaining it without doing it. And then there's a fifth format where I'm in front of the whiteboard. You get the point, right? So the main idea is you take the limited knowledge you have that people love from you and you create different formats around it. The podcast, this. The second piece is I have an ongoing note keep on my phone, whether you have an Android or iPhone, and I just write out a bunch of notes. So when somebody gives me an idea, I'll write it, and that's how I have a bank of ideas.
Interesting. So really those 5 main things, tying into that one main one, draw a web of ideas that thankfully you can kind of pull from to make videos. Beautiful.
Exactly.
So Brenden, I want to ask you on a parting note, and I have to say I really appreciate you sharing everything you know about public speaking, and I've had an absolute blast and a lot of really great value nuggets here. Outside of MasterTalk and what you do every day to enlighten the world, who is Brenden Kumarasamy?
That's one of the problems with me, dude, is like 80 to 90% of my identity is tied to work. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So most of my time is really working. But I'll give you my 10 to 20% that I do outside that obviously fulfills me, but not as much as it does for work. And I'll be honest with that. It's just fun. Like I love hanging out with my family. We like watch horror movies and we eat a bunch of fried chicken together. It's a lot of fun. I gain a lot of weight. It's bad, but then I have a metabolism of a monster, so then it all goes away. That's one. I love yelling at my friends over dinner. So much fun. We're like debating really heaty topics, not politics and stuff. I don't like that stuff, but like business or like yesterday, literally yesterday, my friend visited me from Brazil. He's leaving on Thursday, and it's literally like he's like, open your income statement, which I never like to do. I never like telling people how much money I make. And then he's like, this. He's like, what about this? What about? And he starts poking holes in my spreadsheet, and I'm like, crap. Like I don't know the answer to these questions. He's like really getting me a solid here. So like that's fun for me. That's still businessy. And then the other piece is I love karaoke. Like I can karaoke in 9 languages now. Used to be 8, but I just learned the ninth one. But once again, I don't speak the language fluently. I can just sing in that language. I don't sing well, by the way. And I love dance parties. I club a lot, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, I enjoy that too.
I really appreciate you sharing that. All really fun things to do. And Brenden, it's been an absolute blast. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's a treat.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Brenden Kumarasamy. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.